Welcome to a story that will change everything you think you know about loyalty, protection, and unexpected alliances. This is the tale of Elena Rodriguez, a nurse whose single act of compassion would transform not just her own life, but the entire underworld of Chicago. If you're ready for an epic journey that will keep you on the edge of your seat for the next hour, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because stories like this don't come around every day. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with its usual chaos on that rainy Thursday night in Chicago. Nurse Elena Rodriguez had been on her feet for 12 hours straight, her scrubs stained with coffee and exhaustion weighing heavy on her shoulders. At 28, she had seen enough trauma cases to last several lifetimes, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to walk through those sliding glass doors. The storm outside had been relentless, turning the streets into rivers and making the city's underbelly even more dangerous than usual. Elena was restocking supplies in Trauma Bay 3 when she heard the commotion, raised voices, the squeak of wet shoes on linoleum, and Dr. Martinez barking orders in rapid-fire Spanish. "We need Trauma Bay 1. Now." Elena rushed toward the sound, her training kicking in automatically. What she saw made her freeze for just a moment. 4 men in expensive suits, soaked to the bone, carrying a 5th man whose white shirt was more red than white. The injured man was unconscious, his face pale as marble, but even in his weakened state, there was something commanding about his presence. "Gunshot wound to the abdomen," one of the suited men said tersely to Dr. Martinez. "He's lost a lot of blood." Elena snapped into action. "Get him on the gurney. I need vitals, stat." She began cutting away the man's shirt, revealing a muscular torso marred by a single bullet wound just below his rib cage. His breathing was shallow, pulse weak but steady. As they wheeled him into Trauma Bay 1, Elena caught a glimpse of his face. Sharp jawline, dark hair slightly graying at the temples, and even unconscious. An aura of authority that seemed to fill the room. She had no idea she was looking at Vincent the King Castellano, the most feared man in Chicago's underworld. "Ma'am?" One of the suited men grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "He needs the best care possible." "Money is no object." Elena pulled her arm free, her brown eyes flashing with professional determination. "Every patient gets the best care possible here. That's what we do." For the next 3 hours, Elena worked alongside Dr. Martinez to save the stranger's life. The bullet had missed major organs by millimeters, a miracle in itself. Elena's steady hands assisted in the delicate surgery, her experience with trauma cases proving invaluable. She monitored his vitals, administered medications, and stayed by his side even after the surgery was complete. "You should go home." "Elena," Dr. Martinez said around 4 a.m. "You've been here since yesterday morning." "I'll stay until he's stable," she replied, adjusting the IV drip. Something about this patient troubled her. Not just his condition, but the way those men in suits had looked at her, as if memorizing her face. As dawn approached, the mysterious patient began to stir. Elena was checking his bandages when his eyes fluttered open. Steel gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Where?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "You're in the hospital," Elena said softly, her professional demeanor intact despite the intensity of his gaze. "You were shot. You're going to be okay, but you need to rest." Vincent tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "My men, they're in the waiting room. They've been there all night." Elena gently pressed him back down. "You lost a lot of blood. The surgery went well, but you need to stay still." For a moment, Vincent just stared at her. In his 42 years, he had never met anyone who spoke to him with such calm authority. Not fear, not deference, just professional care. "What's your name?" "Elena. Elena Rodriguez." She checked his pulse, noting the improvement. "And you are?" "Vincent." He decided against giving his last name. "Thank you, Elena Rodriguez. You saved my life." "It's my job," she replied simply. but something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something else. A kind of recognition, as if he was filing away every detail about her. It wasn't until Elena's shift ended at 7 a.m. that she realized how this night would change her life forever. As she gathered her things from her locker, one of Vincent's men approached her. "Miss Rodriguez?" The man was tall, well-dressed, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his intimidating presence. "Mr. Castellano would like to speak with you before you leave." Elena hesitated. Something told her that walking back into that room would cross a line she couldn't uncross. But the nurse in her, the part that had dedicated her life to healing, won out. Vincent was sitting up slightly when she entered, looking much stronger than he had hours before. "Elena," he said, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "I wanted to thank you properly." "There's no need." "There is." His voice was firm but not unkind. "You didn't just save my life tonight. You treated me with dignity when you had no idea who I was. That's rare in my world." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Your world?" Vincent studied her face carefully. "You really don't know, do you?" When she shook her head, he continued. "It's better that way. But Elena, I want you to know, if you ever need anything at all, you call this number." He handed her a business card with only a phone number on it. "I don't understand." "You will." Vincent's gray eyes held hers. "And when you do, remember that Vincent Castellano never forgets a debt." Elena took the card with trembling fingers. Castellano. Even she, who avoided the news and focused only on her work and her small apartment, knew that name. The Castellano family had run Chicago's underworld for 3 generations. I just did my job," she whispered. "No," Vincent said softly. "You did much more than that." As Elena left the hospital that morning, the business card burning in her pocket, she had no idea that Vincent had already made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She had shown him kindness without knowing who he was, had treated him as a human being rather than a monster. In Vincent's world, such genuine compassion was priceless, and Vincent Castellano always protected what was priceless to him. 3 weeks passed before Elena truly understood what Vincent had meant. She had tried to return to her normal routine, 12-hour shifts at the hospital, quiet evenings in her small apartment in Lincoln Park, weekend visits to her elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, who reminded her of her late grandmother. The business card remained tucked in her wallet, a reminder of that strange night. That felt more like a dream with each passing day. Elena had always prided herself on being observant. It was essential in her profession, but it took her embarrassingly long to notice she was being watched. It started with small things. The same black sedan parked across from the hospital when she arrived and when she left. A man in a coffee shop who seemed to be reading the same page of his newspaper for 20 minutes. The feeling of eyes on her as she walked home through the tree-lined streets of her neighborhood. It wasn't until Mrs. Chen mentioned it that Elena realized how obvious it had become. "Elena." "Dear?" the elderly woman said as they shared tea in her cluttered apartment filled with photos of her late husband and children who lived across the country. "Have you noticed the nice young men who've been keeping an eye on our building?" "What men?" Elena set down her teacup, suddenly alert. Mrs. Chen gestured toward her window. "Look for yourself. They're very polite. They helped me with my groceries yesterday and fixed the broken lock on the front door. But they're always there." Elena peered through the lace curtains and felt her blood run cold. 2 men in dark suits stood casually on the corner, one reading a newspaper, the other talking quietly into a phone. They looked exactly like the men who had brought Vincent to the hospital. "Mrs. Chen, how long have they been there?" "About 2 weeks now." "I thought perhaps you had gotten yourself a very attentive boyfriend with excellent security." The old woman's eyes twinkled with mischief, but Elena was too shocked to appreciate the humor. That evening, Elena called the number on the business card. Her hands shook as she dialed, and she almost hung up when a deep voice answered on the first ring. "Miss Rodriguez." It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "I've been expecting your call." "Are you safe?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, caught her off guard. Yes. But I need to understand what's happening. There are men watching me, I know. Can you meet me tomorrow evening? There's a small Italian restaurant called Nonna's on Taylor Street. 7 o'clock. Elena knew she should say no. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she should hang up, change her number, maybe even move to another city. But the nurse in her, the part that had seen Vincent at his most vulnerable, won out again. I'll be there. Nonna's was exactly the kind of place Elena had expected. Dimly lit, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of garlic and basil heavy in the air. Vincent was already seated at a corner table when she arrived, looking nothing like the pale, wounded man she had treated. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his dark hair styled, and when he stood to greet her, she was struck by how commanding his presence was. "Elena!" He pulled out her chair, a gesture so old-fashioned and courteous that it caught her off guard. "Thank you for coming." "I need answers," she said without preamble as she sat down. "Why are your men following me?" Vincent signaled the waiter, who brought over a bottle of wine without being asked. "Because 3 weeks ago you saved the life of a man who has many enemies. And in my world that makes you a target." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "A target? But I'm nobody. I'm just a nurse." "You're the nurse who saved Vincent Castellano's life," he said quietly, pouring wine into her glass. "Word travels fast in certain circles. There are people who would hurt you to get to me. Then why don't you just leave me alone? Forget about me?" Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Vincent's gray eyes met hers across the table. "Because I don't abandon people who've shown me kindness. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because you matter to me." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Elena took a sip of wine, trying to process what he was telling her. "So what happens now? I live the rest of my life with bodyguards? The men watching you aren't just bodyguards, Elena. They're some of my most trusted people. Marco, the one you probably see most often, has been with my family for 15 years. He has a daughter about your age." Vincent leaned forward slightly. "They're not there to control your life. They're there to preserve it." "And if I don't want this protection?" Vincent's expression grew serious. "Then you'd be making a mistake that could cost you everything." As if summoned by their conversation, Marco approached their table. Elena recognized him immediately, one of the men who had brought Vincent to the hospital. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and kind eyes. "Boss," he said quietly, "we have a situation." Vincent's demeanor changed instantly, becoming sharper, more dangerous. "What kind of situation?" "Torino's men were asking questions at the hospital today. About her." Marco glanced at Elena apologetically. "They know her name, her address, her schedule." Elena felt sick. "Who's Torino?" "Someone who's been trying to take over my territory for months," Vincent said grimly. "Someone who would see hurting you as a way to hurt me." The reality of her situation hit Elena like a physical blow. She had saved a life, something she had done hundreds of times before, and now she was caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand. "I want to go home," she whispered. "Marco will drive you," Vincent said, standing. "And Elena? From now on, you don't go anywhere alone. I know it's not the life you chose, but it's the life that will keep you breathing." The drive to her apartment was silent. Elena lost in thought while Marco navigated the Chicago streets with practiced ease. It wasn't until they pulled up to her building that he spoke. "Miss Rodriguez? I know this is overwhelming, but Mr. Castellano, he's a good man. He doesn't make promises lightly, and he doesn't forget his debts." Elena looked at the man who was now responsible for her safety. Do you have a family, Marco? A daughter. She's a teacher. His voice softened. Mr. Castellano paid for her college, helped her get her first job. When I was shot 2 years ago, he made sure my family was taken care of. That's the kind of man he is to people who matter to him. And I matter to him? Marco's smile was gentle. Miss, you saved his life. In our world, that makes you family. As Elena climbed the stairs to her apartment, she realized that her quiet, predictable life was over. She was now part of Vincent Castellano's world, whether she wanted to be or not. And despite her fear, despite the rational voice in her head telling her to run, she found herself thinking about the way Vincent had looked at her across that restaurant table, not as a possession to be protected, but as someone genuinely precious to him. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city, Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She wouldn't run. She would face whatever came next with the same courage she brought to her work every day. Outside her window, Marco sat in his car, vigilant and protective, the first of many guardians who would watch over Elena Rodriguez as she navigated her new reality as the woman who had healed the Mafia king. 2 months into her new reality, Elena had developed an unexpected routine. Marco picked her up for work each morning at 6:30 a.m. sharp, always with a coffee prepared exactly how she liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream. Another guard, Tony, a younger man with an easy smile and a degree in literature, would be waiting when her shift ended. They had become her shadows, but surprisingly, they had also become her friends. The hospital staff had noticed. Of course, Dr. Martinez had pulled her aside twice to ask if everything was okay, and the other nurses whispered among themselves about Elena's mysterious security detail. She had crafted a story about an ex-boyfriend with stalking tendencies, which seemed to satisfy most people's curiosity. What she hadn't expected was how much she would miss Vincent. Since that dinner at Nona's, she had seen him only twice. Brief encounters when he came to check on her security arrangements. Each time, their conversations were polite, professional, but Elena found herself looking forward to these moments more than she cared to admit. There was something about Vincent Castellano that drew her in, despite every rational thought telling her to keep her distance. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when everything changed again. Elena was finishing her shift when Dr. Martinez approached her with an unusual request. Elena, we have a situation. There's been a shooting. Multiple casualties coming in. I need all hands on deck, but... He hesitated. One of the victims specifically asked for you. Elena's blood ran cold. Asked for me by name? Vincent Castellano. He's conscious, stable, but he's refusing treatment from anyone else. Elena found Vincent in Trauma Bay 2, sitting on the edge of the bed despite the protests of 2 nurses. His left arm was in a makeshift sling, blood seeping through a hastily applied bandage, but his eyes were alert and focused entirely on the door, waiting for her. Vincent, she breathed, rushing to his side. What happened? Torino made his move, Vincent said grimly, allowing her to examine his arm. Ambushed my car 3 blocks from here. Bullet grazed my shoulder. I've had worse. Elena began cutting away his shirt sleeve, her professional training taking over despite her personal concern. You could have been killed. But I wasn't. Vincent's good hand caught hers, stilling her movements. Elena, they weren't just after me. They had photos of you, your schedule, your route home from work. The instruments in Elena's hands clattered to the floor. What? Torino's escalating. He thinks hurting you will break me. Vincent's gray eyes were hard as steel. He's not wrong. Elena stared at him, the weight of his words settling over her. Vincent? I know what you're thinking, he said softly. That this is too much, that you never asked for this. And you're right. But Elena, I can't let anything happen to you, not because of me. As Elena cleaned and dressed his wound, her mind raced. She had always prided herself on being independent, on taking care of herself. But the reality was that she was now in danger because she had done what she was trained to do: save a life. "There's something else," Vincent said as she finished bandaging his shoulder. "I'm moving you to a safe house. Tonight." "What?" "No." Elena stepped back. "I have a life, Vincent. I have work, patients who depend on me, Mrs. Chen. Mrs. Chen is already being relocated to a secure facility. She'll be comfortable, I promise." Vincent stood, testing his arm. "And your supervisor has been told you're taking emergency family leave." Elena felt her world tilting. "You can't just rearrange my entire life." "I can and I will," Vincent said firmly. Then his voice softened. "Elena, 3 hours ago, Torino's men were planning to grab you on your way home from work. The only reason they didn't is because Marco spotted the setup and called in reinforcements." The fight went out of Elena as the reality hit her. She sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "How long?" "Until Torino is no longer a threat." "And how long will that be?" Vincent's silence was answer enough. That night, Elena found herself in a sprawling safe house in the suburbs, a beautiful property that felt more like a luxury hotel than a hiding place. Vincent had insisted on staying as well, claiming his own apartment was compromised, but Elena suspected he simply wanted to keep her close. "This is surreal," Elena said as she stood in the kitchen of the safe house, watching Vincent attempt to make coffee one-handed. Despite everything, she found herself smiling at his obvious frustration. "Let me," she said, gently taking over. "You're going to tear your stitches." They worked in comfortable silence, Elena making coffee while Vincent watched her with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of every movement. When she handed him a mug, their fingers brushed, and the simple contact sent electricity through her. "Elena," Vincent said quietly, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about protection anymore." She looked up at him, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere between that night in the hospital and now, you became more than just someone I owe a debt to." Vincent set down his coffee, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "You became someone I can't imagine living without." Elena felt her breath catch. "Vincent, I know it's complicated. I know my world is dangerous and dark and nothing like the life you deserve." He stepped closer, his good hand reaching up to cup her cheek. "But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Elena closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to step away. "This is crazy." "Yes," Vincent agreed, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "It is." When Elena opened her eyes, Vincent was looking at her with such tenderness that it took her breath away. This was not the feared Mafia king the newspapers wrote about. This was a man who had been shot protecting others, who had moved heaven and earth to keep her safe, who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now," Vincent said, leaning his forehead against hers, "we figure out how to build a life together in the middle of all this chaos." Elena knew she should be terrified. She should demand to be taken home, should insist on returning to her normal life. But as she stood there in Vincent's arms, feeling safer than she had in months, despite being in more danger than ever before, she realized that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unexpected places. "Okay," she whispered, and felt Vincent's smile against her forehead. "Okay?" "Okay," she repeated, stronger this time. "But I have conditions." Vincent pulled back to look at her, eyebrows raised. "Conditions?" "I want to keep working. Maybe not at the hospital right now, but I need to help people. It's who I am. Done. And I want to be involved in decisions about my own safety." "I'm not a helpless victim, Vincent." "Agreed. And—" Elena hesitated, then forged ahead. "I want honesty. About your business, about the dangers, about everything. If we're doing this, we're doing it as partners." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and Elena wondered if she had pushed too far. Then he smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Elena Rodriguez," he said, "you are going to turn my world upside down." "Good," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "It sounds like your world could use some shaking up." As they stood together in that kitchen, Elena realized that her life had become something she never could have imagined. She was falling in love with a man whose world was built on danger and secrets, but who looked at her like she was his salvation. And maybe, she thought as Vincent's arms tightened around her, maybe she was. The war with Torino escalated over the following month, but Elena experienced it only through fragments, hushed phone conversations that Vincent would take in another room, the increased number of guards around the safe house, the tension that seemed to radiate from every member of Vincent's organization. Elena had insisted on being useful during their time in hiding, so Vincent had arranged for her to provide medical care to members of his organization who couldn't risk going to traditional hospitals. She set up a makeshift clinic in one of the safe house's spare rooms, treating everything from minor injuries to more serious wounds that resulted from the ongoing conflict. It was through this work that Elena truly began to understand the human cost of Vincent's world. She treated a young man named Danny who had been beaten by Torino's men for refusing to switch sides. She cared for Maria, a restaurant owner whose establishment had been firebombed because she wouldn't pay Torino's extortion fees. "These people," Elena said to Vincent one evening after treating a particularly difficult case, "they're not criminals. They're just trying to live their lives." "That's why we do what we do," Vincent replied. "Someone has to protect them." Elena was beginning to see that Vincent's organization wasn't just about power or money. It was about community, about protecting people who had no other protection. It didn't make the violence right, but it helped her understand why Vincent felt he couldn't simply walk away. The turning point came on a cold December evening. Elena was reading in the safe house's library when Marco burst through the front door, his face grim. "Boss, we have a problem. Torino's made a move on the hospital." Vincent's face went white. "What kind of move?" "He's got men there, asking questions about Elena. They're not being subtle about it." Marco's voice was tight with anger. "Dr. Martinez called. He's concerned for the safety of his staff." Elena felt sick. "He's going after innocent people because of me." "No," Vincent said firmly. "He's going after innocent people because he's a monster who thinks fear is the only way to maintain power." Vincent began making phone calls, his voice sharp and commanding as he coordinated with his lieutenants. Elena watched him work, seeing the leader that his people followed with such loyalty. But she also saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes. The knowledge that every decision he made could mean life or death for the people who trusted him. "Vincent," Elena said when he finished his calls, "I want to help." "Absolutely not. You're staying here where it's safe." "I'm not talking about fighting," Elena said patiently. "I'm talking about using my brain. I know Torino's pattern now. He goes after the people you care about to get to you. But what if we turn that against him?" Vincent looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" "What if we made him think he had succeeded? What if we made him believe he had captured me?" "Elena, no, listen to me," Elena said urgently. "Torino wants me because he thinks I'm your weakness. But what if I became your strength instead? What if we used his obsession with getting to you through me to finally end this?" The plan they eventually developed was complex and risky, but it played to each of their strengths. Elena would appear to be captured while leaving the hospital after a fake emergency call. Torino's men would take her to what they believed was a secure location, but which would actually be surrounded by Vincent's people. "If anything goes wrong," Vincent said as they finalized the details, "if you're in any real danger, you abort." "Promise me." "I promise," Elena said. Though they both knew that once the plan was in motion, she might not have that choice. The night of the operation, Elena felt surprisingly calm as she walked out of St. Mary's Hospital at exactly 11:30 p.m. Torino's men were waiting, just as Vincent had predicted. They grabbed Elena in the parking garage, but their rough handling was mostly for show. They needed her unharmed for their plan to work. Elena was taken to an abandoned warehouse on the south side, a location that Vincent's people had been watching for weeks. As she was tied to a chair in the center of the empty space, Elena focused on staying calm and observing everything around her. Salvatore Torino arrived an hour later, a thin man in his 50s with cold eyes and a cruel smile. "So you're the nurse who thinks she can tame the King of Chicago," he said, circling Elena's chair like a predator. "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena replied, playing her part. "Oh, I think you do." Torino's voice was silky with menace. "Vincent Castellano has gone soft since he met you. He's making mistakes, taking unnecessary risks, all because of his feelings for a little nurse." Elena said nothing, but she was listening carefully to everything Torino revealed about his plans, his organization, his weaknesses. The attack came at dawn, just as they had planned. Vincent's men surrounded the warehouse while Torino was still gloating over his anticipated victory. The battle was swift and decisive. Torino's forces were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. When Vincent burst through the warehouse doors, Elena had never been so happy to see anyone in her life. He cut her bonds with hands that shook slightly, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. "I'm fine," Elena assured him. "But Vincent Torino is finished," Vincent said grimly. Torino had been captured alive, along with most of his lieutenants. The threat that had hung over them for months was finally over. As they left the warehouse together, Elena realized that she had proven something important, not just to Vincent, but to herself. She wasn't a victim in this world. She was a partner. She had used her intelligence and courage to help end a war, and in doing so, she had found her place in Vincent's life and organization. "I'm proud of you," Vincent said as they drove back to the safe house. "But I never want to go through anything like that again." "Neither do I," Elena admitted. "But Vincent, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to be the kind of woman who sits safely on the sidelines while you face danger alone. If we're going to be together, we're going to be partners in everything." Vincent looked at her with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "You're going to give me gray hair." "You already have gray hair," Elena pointed out, making him laugh despite everything they had just been through. That night, as they held each other in the safety of the safe house, Elena knew that their relationship had fundamentally changed. They were no longer just a man trying to protect a woman he cared about, and a woman trying to understand a world she had been thrust into. They were partners, equals, who had chosen to face whatever came next together. The war with Torino was over, but Elena understood that there would always be new challenges, new threats, new crises to navigate. But she also knew that she and Vincent would face them together, drawing strength from their love and their shared commitment to protecting the people and community they had both come to care about. 6 months after the end of the Torino War, Elena stood in the empty shell of what would soon become the Rodriguez Community Health Center. The building, a former department store in the heart of Chicago's South Side, was being completely renovated to serve as a comprehensive medical facility for people who fell through the cracks of traditional healthcare. "The pharmacy will go here," Elena explained to Vincent as they walked through the construction site, both wearing hard hats and safety vests. "And we'll have a dental clinic on the second floor, along with mental health services." Vincent watched her with undisguised pride as she outlined her vision. In the months since Torino's defeat, Elena had thrown herself into planning this clinic with the same passion and attention to detail that she brought to everything else. "What about security?" Vincent asked, his protective instincts still strong despite the relative peace they now enjoyed. "Discreet but effective," Elena replied. "Marco's already identified several of your people who have medical training or interest in healthcare. They'll be part of the staff, providing security while also contributing to patient care." The clinic was just one part of the larger transformation that Elena had brought to Vincent's organization. Under her influence, the Castellano family had begun shifting more of their operations toward legitimate businesses and community services. Dr. Martinez called this morning, Elena said as they continued their tour. He wants to volunteer here 2 days a week. Vincent smiled. He's not the only one. I've had calls from 3 other doctors at St. Mary's asking about opportunities here. There's something else I want to discuss with you, Elena said as they reached what would be her office. I've been thinking about expanding our services beyond just medical care. What do you have in mind? Legal aid, job training, educational programs. I want this to be a true community center, a place where people can get help with all the challenges they face, not just their health problems. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. That would require significant resources, which we have, Elena pointed out. Vincent, your organization generates millions of dollars every year. What if we used more of that money to build something lasting? Something that would make the community stronger and safer for everyone? You're talking about fundamentally changing how we operate, Vincent said. I'm talking about building on what you already do well, Elena corrected. You already protect people. You already solve problems that the traditional system can't handle. I'm just suggesting we do it in ways that create more opportunities and fewer conflicts. Vincent was quiet for a moment, looking out through the construction site toward the neighborhood beyond. My grandfather built this organization to protect our people when no one else would, Vincent said finally. My father expanded it to provide opportunities when legitimate businesses wouldn't hire Italians. Maybe it's time for the next generation to build something even better. Elena felt a surge of excitement. So you'll support the expansion? I'll do more than support it, Vincent said, turning to face her. I'll help you lead it. Over the following weeks, Elena and Vincent worked together to develop a comprehensive plan for transforming the Castellano organization. They would maintain their traditional services, protection, mediation, and problem-solving, but they would also invest heavily in legitimate businesses and community development. The key, Elena explained during a meeting with Vincent's senior lieutenants, is to make ourselves indispensable to the community in positive ways. Instead of people fearing us or simply tolerating us, we want them to see us as partners in building a better neighborhood. Marco, who had become one of Elena's strongest supporters, nodded approvingly. It's smart business, too. The stronger the community is, the more stable our operations become. As the health center neared completion, Elena found herself taking on an increasingly public role. She gave interviews to community newspapers, spoke at neighborhood meetings, and worked with city officials to ensure that their programs would complement rather than duplicate existing services. You're becoming quite the public figure, Vincent observed one evening as they reviewed Elena's schedule for the following week. Is that a problem? Elena asked. Not a problem, Vincent said, but it does create new challenges. The more visible you become, the more you become a target for people who oppose what we're doing. Elena understood. There were still elements within the criminal underworld who saw Vincent's reforms as weakness, and there were law enforcement officials who viewed any Castellano initiative with suspicion. We'll manage the risks, Elena said confidently. We always do. The grand opening of the Rodriguez Community Health Center took place on a sunny Saturday in May. The entire neighborhood turned out for the celebration, along with city officials, healthcare professionals, and members of the media. Elena cut the ribbon while Vincent stood proudly beside her, both of them surrounded by the community they had committed to serving. This is just the beginning, Elena said in her speech to the crowd. This center represents our commitment to building a stronger, healthier community, where everyone has access to the care and support they need to thrive. After the ceremony, as they toured the facility with visitors, Elena was approached by a young woman with a baby in her arms. Miss Rodriguez, the woman said shyly, I just wanted to thank you. My son was born with a heart condition, and we couldn't afford the specialists he needed. When I heard about your clinic, I didn't know if you could help, but I was desperate. Elena smiled warmly. What's your name? Maria Santos. And this is my son, Diego. Elena looked at the healthy, smiling baby and felt her heart swell. Dr. Chen, our pediatric cardiologist, told me about Diego's case. How is he doing? Perfect, Maria said, tears in her eyes. The surgery was successful, and he's going to live a completely normal life. I don't know how to thank you. You just did, Elena replied, gently touching the baby's hand. This is why we're here. As the day wound down and the last visitors left, Elena and Vincent stood together in the main lobby of the health center, surrounded by the quiet hum of a facility ready to serve its community. Tired? Vincent asked, noting the exhaustion in Elena's eyes. Exhausted, Elena admitted, but happy. Really, truly happy. Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her close. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Elena looked at him curiously as he pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught as he dropped to one knee right there in the lobby of their health center, surrounded by the evidence of what they had built together. Elena Rodriguez, Vincent said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his gray eyes. You saved my life in more ways than one. You brought light into my darkness, purpose into my chaos, and love into a heart I thought was too damaged to feel it. Elena's hands flew to her mouth, tears already starting to fall. I know my world is complicated. I know there will always be challenges, always be risks. But I also know that I want to face all of it with you by my side. Vincent opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring that caught the lobby lights and threw rainbows across the walls. Will you marry me? Elena didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. I love you, he murmured against her hair. I love your courage, your compassion, your stubborn insistence on saving everyone you meet. I love you too, Elena replied, pulling back to look at him. I love your loyalty, your protection of the people you care about, and the way you've let me see the man behind the reputation. As they kissed in the lobby of their health center, Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that chaotic night in the emergency room to this peaceful evening in the facility they had built together, every step had led them here. 1 year later, Elena stood at the window of Vincent's penthouse apartment, now their shared home, watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan. She wore a simple white silk robe, her engagement ring catching the morning light, and her hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach, where their first child was growing. Penny for your thoughts, Vincent said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Decaf for her, regular for him. Just thinking about how much has changed, Elena replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. 2 years ago, I was just a nurse with a quiet life. And now? Elena smiled, leaning into his side. Now I'm a nurse, a community health director, a soon-to-be wife, and a future mother who happens to be in love with the most powerful man in Chicago. Vincent's arm tightened around her, his hand moving to rest over hers on her stomach. Any regrets? Elena considered the question seriously. Her life had indeed become complicated beyond anything she could have imagined. But she had also discovered parts of herself she never knew existed. The Rodriguez Community Health Center had become a model for community-based health care, attracting attention from public health officials across the country. No regrets, she said finally. But I do have some concerns about today. Vincent raised an eyebrow. Wedding jitters? More like concerns about having a wedding that's being attended by half the FBI's organized crime task force, Elena said with a wry smile. Vincent laughed. They're not here to arrest anyone, Elena. They're here because Agent Morrison's daughter was one of the first patients at your clinic. And his wife considers you a personal hero. It's still surreal, Elena said, having FBI agents at our wedding. It's the new normal, Vincent replied. The lines between us and them aren't as clear as they used to be. The wedding ceremony took place at St. Alphonsus Church, the same church where Vincent's grandparents had been married 70 years earlier. Elena walked down the aisle in a simple but elegant dress, her arm linked with Dr. Martinez's, the man who had become like a father to her. Vincent waited at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his gray eyes bright with emotion as he watched Elena approach. The church was filled with an extraordinary mix of people, members of Vincent's organization sitting next to hospital staff, community leaders next to FBI agents, elderly neighborhood residents next to young families who had been helped by their programs. When they exchanged vows, Vincent's voice was steady but emotional. Elena, you saved my life that night in the hospital, but more than that, you saved my soul. You showed me that strength doesn't come from fear or control, but from love and service. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift you've given me. Elena's vows were equally heartfelt. Vincent, you taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about creating communities where people can flourish. You showed me that love can exist in the most unexpected places, and that two people working together can change the world. I promise to stand beside you as we continue building something beautiful together. As they kissed to seal their marriage, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Elena looked out at the faces of their guests, people whose lives had been touched by their work, whose futures had been made brighter by their efforts. The reception was held at the Palmer House Hotel, with dinner and dancing that continued well into the night. During a quiet moment, Agent Morrison approached Elena at the head table. "Mrs. Castellano," he said with a slight smile, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did for my daughter." "How is she doing?" Elena asked, "Thriving. She's starting her sophomore year at Northwestern in the fall, studying pre-med. She says she wants to be like you when she grows up." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's the best wedding gift you could have given me." As the evening wound down, Elena and Vincent stood together on the hotel's rooftop terrace, looking out over the city lights. "So, Mrs. Castellano," Vincent said, "what's next for us?" Elena smiled, her hand moving to her stomach. "Well, in about 7 months, we're going to have a very important new addition to our family." "And professionally?" "I've been thinking about that," Elena said. "The health center model is working so well here that I've been getting calls from other cities. Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, they all want to know how to replicate what we've built." Vincent nodded. "You're talking about expanding beyond Chicago." "I'm talking about creating a movement," Elena said excitedly. "Vincent, what if we could help other organizations evolve the way yours has? What if we could show them how to use their resources and influence to build stronger communities, instead of just maintaining control?" Vincent looked at his new wife with amazement. "Elena Castellano, you are going to change the world." "We are going to change the world," Elena corrected. "Together." The next morning, as Elena and Vincent prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Italy, they received word that 3 other cities had formally requested their help in developing community health and development programs. "Ready for the next adventure, Mrs. Castellano?" Vincent asked as they climbed into the car that would take them to the airport. "Ready," Elena replied, settling into his arms. "But first, let's go see where your family came from. I want to understand all the pieces of the man I married." As their car pulled away from the hotel, Elena looked back at the city skyline, knowing that they would return in 2 weeks to continue the work they had started. She had learned that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with a single act of kindness, and that when 2 people commit to building something together, they can create changes that ripple far beyond their own lives. And that's how Elena Rodriguez learned that when you heal someone's body, you might end up healing their soul, and they might end up healing yours in return. She discovered that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, that strength comes from service, and that two people working together can indeed change the world. If this story of unexpected love, transformation, and hope has touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales that remind us that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. Until next time, remember, in a world that often seems divided, love and compassion remain the most powerful forces for change.